All right, so now that we've had some fun playing around with hard edges, let's get into doing some soft edges. In order to do that, we have to work wet into wet, but there is a spectrum of wet into wet. There's sort of moist or super wet, and when you get super wet, you get like cool kind of fusions going on between the colors. You're gonna wanna grab this page right here, and we're gonna jump in and do some soft edges and wet into wet. Alrighty, so for this first one, it's just called damp. So you're going to grab some water and just float in some water all the way around, not too much, and you'll get the hang of this as you do it more and more, but that's our sort of starting point. And I'm going to use, I think for this, yellow ochre. So I'm going to grab some of my yellow ochre, I'm going to add some water to my palette, and just mix up some yellow ochre. There we go. All right, so we've got our damp paper, and we're just going to start painting into it. And when your paper is damp like this, it's easier to do a wash because the paint just slides around. The paint just slides around more easily. All right, and just sort of. I'm not being too careful because the whole idea here is that this will spread out, okay? And I'm going to grab another color, maybe some cerulean blue, and I'm going to let it dry a little bit because this is called damp. Just mix up some water. I've got some cerulean blue going, and start painting in there, and you're going to see that it's going to bleed and spread, okay? Now, this is the thing. If you want to keep that in the middle, you have to kind of keep in mind that gravity is going to pull everything down. So you have to flatten out your page and just sort of let that transition happen. Some of these areas where it's wet, still pretty wet. It's going to spread a little bit more, so I'm just going to dry that up. And also, this is going to create a soft edge if I go around the edge here and just even wet it a little bit more, so that the opposite of a hard edge, we're getting a little bit of feathering, a little bit softer edge. Okay, so there we go. That's a damp, maybe a little bit more than damp. That could have been even slightly drier. For this next one, we're going to do wet. I'm going to go with some kind of cad red or a permanent red if you have permanent red. All right, so now we're going for wet, not super wet, where the paint's just kind of out of control completely and you're going to get kind of really cool fusion effects, but nice and damp. And for that, the easiest way to do that is to just sort of spray your paper, and I sometimes will just sort of spray over there to see how the spray's going to go. But yeah, get it nice and wet. And I'm going to just start mixing, floating in my yellow ochre again. Okay? And in this kind of a technique, when it's just really wet, you don't necessarily have to paint like a bead. You can kind of float your paint in and maybe let it be inconsistent on purpose, because maybe that's sort of the effect you're going for, creating some texture. Okay? Now, if you don't want to necessarily wait for all that to dry, you can grab some of these sort of water areas. And I might just dip in a little bit more. I want something a little more pigmented in the center there. But see how the tones really start to blend even more than there? So if you really want to get an actual super wet fusion, you've got to get your paper pretty wet. And I mean, like, there's noticeable amounts of water in the area that you want the fusion to happen. And now I want there to be lots of water, lots of paint, okay? And I'm going to start just painting in there. Okay. Get this all around here. But now I'm going to grab some cerulean blue and I'm going to dip that in there. I'm actually just going to pull some in just to show how that kind of reacts when you get a lot of paint. All right, so depending on what you're painting, there's a time and a place for all of these, but you just want to keep in mind that the more water you have, the more wet it is, the less control you have. So most of the time you're probably going to stay over here in this damp area, but it is good to know that you can go all the way to this kind of crazy wetness where anything can happen. All right, so we're just going to let that dry, and we're going to move on to just kind of blotting out, different ways you can blot out. I'm just going to start painting in here around the edges, and I'm going to let my paint, because this is maybe a softer edge sky, I'm going to let my paint sort of spread out and just work quickly. And I've got my paper towel ready. And I'm going to just quickly mist that a little bit. Now, you're just going to grab your paper towel and you can go in there and create a little bit of a soft edge by lifting out. Now, there's times where you might want that, and there's times where you might not, but it's a cool effect nonetheless, and you can go back in and possibly add in a little bit. Another way you can lift out, just if you need to, we did it a little bit before, but you can go back and sort of scrub with the water and soften up those edges just with water. So I'll just do that here, take some water and soften up around the edge and grab it with my paper towel. Okay, now what if we want to make a soft transition between two colors? If you want to create a soft edge, kind of know where you're going to do that. The trick here is to not let it dry. Okay, so I'm going to grab a little bit of water and just pull the edge of my yellow ochre with some water. Okay, it's going to start to spread there. Okay, the same way. Now, I don't want it to quite go crazy. But I do want it to be a nice soft edge with a little more yellow ochre. And just bring those over and let them mix a bit. Now you could, here where they're actually blending, where I can start to blend those colors together while they're wet and get sort of a little bit of a gradient. Okay, but keep them colors sort of retained in there. So let them each be their own color, but no hard edge. Okay, now for a fusion, you're going to want this area to be wet in the center, so that as we start to paint, they're going to spread out and kind of go crazy, just like this one over here. So I'm going to just start painting my blue, and you're going to see it starts to kind of go crazy. Okay, so you just want to work really quick get that down and let it sort of spread out. Okay, and now I'm going to be quick so that this doesn't dry, and just start to get my red in there. Okay. Now it looks like that's not quite wet enough, so I'm just going to help it. Okay. And add some more paint. And gravity can help you a bit. You can let it run. Okay. And let it run one way. And then I'm going to let it run the other way too. So let some of that, oop, this crazy one's still going wild. So just watch that. So here we're letting the paints mix together, create new colors in between. So that was fun. Hopefully you got an idea of some of the wet on wet techniques you can create. It does get a little bit out of hand sometimes, but the thing is, this technique is sort of unique to watercolor, and you get these just beautiful, rich mixtures sometimes. When you don't worry too much about control and you let things happen, sometimes these, you know, people might think this is ugly, this bleed, but I would say that sort of, these lines are beautiful because you can only get that with watercolor. So there might be areas you want that. But there are other times where you don't want this to be there and you have to be able to control it. So you want your water to be, you want it to be damp, not wet. Whereas here where it's wet, you're gonna get those bleeds where the colors kind of mix and the pigment pools. Or over here, you get these rich mixtures. But again, this is not something you want in your, you know, flat washes. So there's a place for this, and it makes beautiful, rich colors, but not everywhere. We're going to talk about other ways to, you know, leave the white of your paper or create soft edges, but that's just using the paper towel. You can do that. You can also use a sponge. And here we've got a really nice kind of soft edge going from yellow to red. Really nice in that transition over. Or here we're actually letting those colors mix together. Very cool. Now this is, when I say fusion, what I mean is like, see how this is changing color. It's actually becoming like a lavender or a purple, and that the red over here is starting to mix. So we're actually letting those pigments start to mix together. And again, there's times where you want to do that. All right, so that wraps up the wet on wet techniques. We're going to try these out as well as the hard edges or flat washes on some different kinds of paper. And then we're going to get into some assignments where we're going to put these things into play.